Hello everyone and welcome to an incredible fighting game from round 7 of this year's Airthings Masters. It's Moke and Niemann versus Magnus Carlsen. It's like I said, it's a brilliant attacking game by both players. It's very complicated and it's just one big fight. So the ending could have been a little bit different, but only if you played it perfectly. And we're gonna get to that. You guys will have a very nice pause the video moment. So let's dive straight into it. So Niemann with the white pieces opens with c4. He goes for the English opening. g6 by Magnus. We have knight to c3. And now c5 going for the symmetrical variation. Knight to f3, bishop to g7 and e3 now. We have knight to f6 and d4 striking in the center. Captures, and now Magnus castles. And here we have d5, grabbing more space in the center. Looks a little bit weird because there's really nothing there for white to attack, but if it works, then it works. So e6, Magnus challenges this advanced pawn as the white king is still in the center of the board, and now bishop to e2. Of course, we want to castle to safety. E captures on d5, c captures, and d6 now. And here you could go for something like castles because that's what people usually play here. This is an own position. You don't have to worry about bishop to g4. There's a bishop on e2. But for some reason, Niemann first plays h3 before castling. And it is now as of move 10 that we have a completely new game. Rook to e8 by Magnus. And here we have castles. Knight to b7. Now the knight might be coming to c5. We have bishop to e3, and now Magnus waits with this knight to c5 maneuver or some other maneuver, let's say a6, b5 or whatnot, and he goes for the move from the thumbnail, and that is rook captures on e3, and it's just a very nice positional exchange sacrifice, so not gaining all that much. And what's even more interesting is that after rook captures on e3 and f captures, Magnus plays queen to e7 going after the e3 pawn, but he's not in a rush to win it. As you'll see, and if white tries to defend it, for example, with queen d2 or something like that, it's not all that easy to defend. If you play knight d1, okay, you can maybe play it like this, but it's super passive for white, and that's no way to play chess. We can play knight b6, go after the d5 pawn, and so on. So instead, king to h2 first, and now we have knight to c5. Again, not rushing with grabbing the pawn. Now we have excellent control over the e4 square, and now queen to d2, defending the pawn. Also very interesting is b4, as b4 is always interesting, grabbing more space on the queen side, but then this is very hard to evaluate. For example, captures. What do you make of this? It's a complete mess. You know that this knight is going to move. Look at all of these dark square holes here. The e3 pawn is weak. The knight can come here. The knight can come here. Bishop coming to e5 at some point might be very strong. So it's not easy to assess this. So instead, just queen d2, nicely defending. And now we have bishop to d7. It's time to bring the rook into the game. Bishop to d3. And now rook to e8. We have rook 8 to e1. Now the e3 pawn is defended. And bishop to h6. Magnus says, nope, that pawn is not going anywhere. And finally, Niemann plays b4. He chases away the knight. And it's not easy to decide what to do here. For example, if you capture on d3, that's not going to be great. Queen captures and bishop captures on e3. Looks like you've accomplished something, but there's g4 for white here. And now what do you play? If bishop f4 check, king g2, it's not all that impressive for black. White is definitely the one who will be leading this game. So after b4, we have knight c to e4 by Magnus as planned, and now bishop captures on e4, knight captures on e4, and now queen to d4, putting more pressure on the knight here. So just knight captures on c3. If Magnus wanted, he could play f5. It's also very interesting. But again, for example, knight captures, f captures, attacks the knight here, knight to d2. Now we can play bishop g7, bring the bishop to e5, put pressure on the king. We still have to figure out what to do with our light square bishop, but it should be playable. But okay, in the game, knight captures on c3. This is a bit more straightforward. Queen captures, and now bishop to b5. Challenging the rook here, rook to f2, and now bishop to g7. Now attacking the queen, queen back to c2, and now h5. So Now the bishop pair is very nicely placed. I wouldn't call it fully operational just yet, but it's getting there. And now white has to decide whether e4 is the move now or maybe something else. So first, Niemann plays a4. He includes this sort of a tempo gaining move because you gain more space on the queen side and you will play e4 next. So it seems like it doesn't matter, but it seems like this move only helps black because after bishop to d7, now Magnus controls the c8 square and he will be getting rook to c8 with tempo. So e4 now. Now comes rook to c8, attacking the queen, and now queen to b3, and rook to c3 now, attacking the white queen. So the queen has to move once again, queen to d1, now rook to c4, putting pressure on the b4 pawn. And of course, well, the a4 pawn is still attacked. Okay, the white queen is defending it, but putting a lot of pressure on white's position. However, here Hans finds a very nice advancement, and that is pawn to e5. And of course, black does not want to give up the dark square bishop. That would be silly. It's pretty much why you give up the exchange. You want your very strong bishop pair. Plus, it's a very important defender. So here, d captures on e5 by Magnus, and now d6. And now look at this monster pass pawn. It's definitely not going to be easy to take care of it. We have queen to f6, and now comes queen to d5, putting pressure on this rook on c4. Now comes rook to c6 by Magnus, attacking the d6 pawn, and queen captures on e5. We have queen captures on d6, and here we have a queen trade. We have captures, and now knight to g5, going after the f7 pawn. So how do you assess this position? Magnus has 5 pawns, Niemann has 4 pawns. However, Niemann is up the exchange and attacking that f7 pawn. So white should be a little bit better, but in a quicker time format such as rapid, the bishop pair, well, even in classical chess, the bishop pair can be very, very unpleasant. So here, bishop to f6, defending the pawn by blocking it, by blocking the rook, and now attacking the knight. Knight to e4, attacking both the bishop and the rook, but now bishop to e5 with check. We have king to h1, and now comes rook to d4. Attacking putting pressure on the knight and also attacking the b4 pawn. So rook to d2, offering a rook trade, and now bishop captures on a4. We are grabbing that pawn, rook captures on d4, bishop captures, and now knight to d6. So now we are again putting pressure on f7, so we might have some ideas of going after that pawn. Also, we're attacking the b7 pawn, and Magnus will try to utilize his advantage on the queen side. He does have 2 pawns against 1. If he can win this one, then it's going to be very hard to stop them. So here we have bishop to c3, attacking the pawn, and rook to e4 now. Niemann defends the pawn. We have b5 now, and rook to e8 with check. Here he abandons the defense of this pawn in order to get to this pawn, to get to the f7 pawn. We have rook to e8 with check, king to g7, and now rook to e7. So now we will be capturing this pawn, because if bishop defends, then you of course give up the b5 pawn. So bishop captures on b4. We have rook captures on f7 with check, and now king to h6. You could also play king to g8. It is possible. Then we just unpin with rook here, and we defend our knight. But this is much more interesting. King to h6. And now there are all sorts of checkmating patterns possible. Here Niemann goes knight to e4, and his plan now is h4, create an outpost for the knight on g5, and then play rook to h7 checkmate. So can Magnus do anything about this? Let's see. Magnus starts by pushing a5. Of course, he wants to start pushing those pawns, and if he can be in time to defend against this checkmate, then it's a good idea. We have h4, preparing this checkmate. Now comes bishop b3. We have to move with tempo. We attack the rook, rook to a7, and now a4. So look at all of the squares that the bishops are covering. Imagine if this bishop is on b2, then all of these squares are covered, and then you just push the pass pawn. There's nothing white can do about this. So if this bishop comes here, it's game over. So here we have g4. Interestingly, if knight g5, then you do not have checkmate. Magnus can block with bishop to g8, so that's the problem for Niemann. So he tries something else, g4. He finds a different mating net. H captures on g4, and now knight to f6. Again, putting pressure on black. Now rook h7 is the threat of checkmate, as the pawn covers the g5 square. So g5, now clearing the g6 square for the king, and now h5, now taking away the g6 square from Carlsen's king, and now again rook to h7 is the threat of checkmate. So bishop to c2, now guarding against checkmate, and now the position is winning for Magnus unless white finds, it's such a move that you don't expect anyone to find unless it's in a really important classical game where you have a lot of time on the clock, but you guys are comfortable in your own homes, you have plenty of time, I hope, so you have time to crack this one. It's not easy. Feel free to pause the video and try to find the only move that saves the game for Niemann while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations, as this is one of the hardest pause the video moments you've probably seen on this channel in a very long time, or maybe ever. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is rook to a6. If you found this one without figuring out the why, then you have great intuition and you should, hone it. But if you found everything, then that's just incredible. You are way too strong to be watching this channel. However, we are going to show why this is so incredible. So the thing is, we are now threatening some very nasty discoveries, like maybe we can play knight to d5 check and pick up the bishop, and then we're not going to lose the game. So of course, black will play something like bishop to e3. Black can play other moves. I'm just showing the strongest ones. Now comes the hard part. Okay, so you got this far. How do you save the game now? We're still just gonna push our pawns and win the game. Here comes knight to e4 with check, and now the problem is black cannot capture this pawn. If you capture the pawn, knight to g3 check, and now look at this. The black king cannot go up the board. You have to go here, and now king g2, threatening rook to h6 checkmate. And now after bishop prevents this, let's say bishop to f8, you want to stop this. Now rook c6, we attack the bishop here, and after you move the bishop, now comes rook to c1, and you're getting checkmated here. So not possible to defend. Okay, you can play bishop e4 check and give up the bishop, but you will still lose this game. So that's not happening. So the other thing you can do after knight to e4 check is not go capture the pawn. But that means you have to go up the board. So king g7. Now we continue with h6 check as the pawn is nicely defended. King to f8. Now comes rook to a8 with check. And now we will most likely see a perpetual king to f7, rook to a7 check, king to g6, rook to a6 check. And now black will either repeat by going up the board, or black can even go king to f5, but it's not a problem. Knight to c3. And now look at this. The knight is guarding this diagonal. So now h7, h8 is a huge threat, and you don't have time for bishop to b2 because the knight is here, or rather you have to play bishop to b2 right away to be in time to stop the pawn, but that just means after bishop b2 we will play knight captures on b5, eliminate one of black's very strong passed pawns, and now we are guarding the a3 square, and all of your troubles are over. Well, not all of them. You still have to play precisely. For example, if bishop here attacks the knight, we can just play h7, and now look at this. If bishop captures on b5, rook b6. Now you can't move the bishop because we pick up this bishop and we promoted this pawn to a queen. So it's complete madness. Well, that was in the position because the game was so crazy, and after Carlsen's bishop to c2, it was possible to escape. However, only if you find this incredible resource of rook to a6. Niemann in the game played king to g2, sort of a similar idea. Of course, the checkmating patterns exist, and you want to be closer to king to g3. But now Magnus is well just in time for bishop to c3. Now you move with tempo. The knight is attacked. Knight to g8 with check, and now king captures on h5. Now the problem is you can capture the h5 pawn, because after rook to a6, which was played, yes, Niemann is again threatening checkmate. Now there's bishop to e4 check, king to g3, and the bishop to e5 check. We have king f2, now g3 with check, creating a very important escape square for the black king. King to e3, and now, yes, your bishop is attacked, but Magnus just plays g2, and it was in this position on move 54 that Hans Moke Niemann resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. So really, like I announced, an incredible fighting game. Very early exchange sacrifice by Magnus. Niemann played it extremely well. He got that very nice e6 pawn sacrifice with advancing the pawn e5 and advancing the pawn to d6. Everything was incredible, and then the game could have ended in a draw, but that incredible rook to a6 move was required, and I mean that's just too much for a rapid game. So here, okay, you resign because if you capture the bishop, black gets a queen into the game, so that's not happening. And of course, if you try and stop the pawn, bishop d4 check, and next we're getting a queen into the game. So whatever you play loses. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Really an incredible one. There are, of course, so many games being played. I only cover one or two, maybe sometimes three of them, depending on how much time I have. So feel free to use #suggestion, and if I will have more time, I will, of course, go through your suggestions and cover as many games as possible. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Tough break for Hans, but he played a brilliant game. I would like to thank Lucifer45, Non-Commercial EP, Dale Cook, Anwar, the 95% American Flag Numa, David Kimura, and Doug Reynolds for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of this wonderful event until it finishes. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.